Okay. And we'll start the slideshow here. Okay, so this will be pretty quick, and just want to give you all what I've learned over the years with foot care, and then we'll get into a little bit of gear and just some tips for packing and unpacking and keeping things straight and not losing stuff. That's the big one. That happens to a lot of people in the last couple of XRedRocks. I'm always picking up a ton of gear after all the launches. So part of it's just keeping track of your stuff. But these are my feet after a pretty wet day. I don't remember which X Alps this was, but this is where you don't want to end up. Of course, we'll start this off with a story. In 2015, the last day, I pulled my night pass getting down to the med and did over 100K that night. And my feet were already completely mangled at that point, and just unbelievably painful. I had blisters around every toe, on the bottoms of my feet, on my heels, blisters on top of blisters on top of blisters. I learned that I am very blister prone, and every day of the X Alps after day, I think Aaron Duragatti, he and I spent most of day 2 together. I have video of him actually peeling the bottom of his feet off. It was incredibly hot in the beginning of the 2015 X Alps. I think it was the hottest in Europe history in the summer for the first 3 days. And it was also really wet because it kept ODing at night, and we'd be walking at night. And so it was kind of a mix of everything bad, including a lot of heat and a lot of moisture, which is terrible for blisters. And so I did a lot of research after 2015, tons and tons and tons, did a bunch of hormone testing. And I learned one of the main things was diet and staying away from things that cause a lot of inflammation, i.e. sugar and carbs. You can get away with eating whatever you want if you're doing a 24-hour, an ultra or something, but in a 12-day race like the X Alps, or even a 3-day race like the XRedRocks, diet becomes a pretty major factor, especially after kind of 24, 36 hours. And so you want to eat things that don't cause a lot of inflammation, because if you inflame, if you get bigger feet, they don't fit in your shoes. I learned as the years went by in the X Alps to have bigger shoes as the race went on, just anticipating all the trauma to your feet. But the main thing, of course, is friction and heat and dryness. We'll get into all that, but here's a little video that's kind of humorous. This was the end of the 2019 race, which until the last night, I had no foot problems whatsoever. They got way better in 2017, almost perfect in 2019. But then again, we had this crazy heat wave at the end of the 2019 race. The last 3 days were unbelievably stable and hot. This big high pressure system came in from Northern Africa, and it was just brutal. It was over 100 degrees in Chamonix when I walked through Cham. And the last night, I pulled a night pass to get ahead of Marcus Anders and Toby Grosserbacher, who both just had a pretty good X Alps in the 23 race. But I walked barefoot that night for about 3 hours. I used Ben's shoes. I passed out in the middle of the road. Luckily, it wasn't a very busy road, and my feet just went to hell. And so once again, I, learned, it got better, but here's the end of that race. This should work.
Just finished breakfast here. Gavin's looking shit hot and ready to crush the day. He's wearing my shoes, and he's moving at about 2 kilometers per hour, maybe per day.
Per day.
How you feeling, Gav?
I don't feel good at all. Last couple days crushed me and my feet are mangled, and I'm ready to be done.
We're almost there.
Yeah, so that's oh, here. Hold on, let me get to the next slide here. So that was the end of the 2019 race, and these are my feet at the end of the 2015 race. The next day, this was in Monaco. The next day, I literally had to get one of my supporters, Bruce, to carry me to the bathroom. I couldn't even walk. You could see it was pretty brutal. So there's good news and bad news when it comes to blisters. The bad news is, if you're prone to blisters, they can be pretty hard to fix. The good news for those who aren't is you aren't. That's pretty good. I happen to be one of those people who is very prone to blisters. I have toes that kind of lap onto one another, and I sweat a lot and I run hot, and that doesn't help. And so, but the other good news to go with the bad is that there are things you can do to prevent them. And blisters are really debilitating. They take people out of hike and fly races more than anything else. Celine had to bow out this year in the XOps because of blisters. I don't know if anybody else did, but typically you see some pretty horrific shots of people's feet in hike and fly races, especially ones that are multi-day. But there are ways to fix it. One other bit of bad news is that I've read actually several books on blisters, done a ton of research over the years because I do suffer with them and I hate them. And I, was trying very hard to not suffer so much from blisters, but the fixes, if you will, are really different per person. So I'm going to mention a lot of things in this presentation that can help, but the thing is you must try all these things. You got to do everything. You got to go through all the different motions to find out really what works. For example, Hansa hardly ever got blisters in his 5 XOps campaigns, and he swears by Brave Soldier, which is a lubricant. It's like a Vaseline. If I use something like that, my feet, I can just watch the blisters grow. So, I can't put lubricants on my feet. It just makes them more sweaty. It locks the moisture in, makes it even worse. So the solutions are different for different people, but here are some guidelines that I think can help. I just want to make sure that anybody else hasn't gotten into the room, because I have to sign them in. It looks like they haven't. So hot spots, you all know, if you've done any walking, you can start to feel that blister brewing. By then, you're already a little bit too late. So the best thing to do when you start feeling any kind of little point in your shoe, on your feet that hurts, just stop immediately. It's not going to be the end of the race. You're just going to take a few minutes and try to sort it out. Change socks, change shoes, put some tape on. I'll show you some pictures of tape that I really like later on, but do something to try to get the hot spot to go away. You could even knife your shoes and just open them up a little bit right at that point. Friction is the cause of all blisters. Now, there is a huge debate about how to stop the friction. You've seen gel pads, which I think are horseshit, and I don't feel like they work at all, because they just add more friction to that point. But again, for some people, they could very much work. There's all kinds of lubricants, from Vaseline, Glide to Brave Soldier. There's a million others. That's a possibility. What worked for me was 3M medical tape. I'll show you a picture of that later on. But I would just be proactive about that. In places that I knew were going to be bad, I just wrap them with tape every time I took my shoes off, which was several times a day. So you can go that route. But the main thing that everybody says, and everybody agrees on, and all the books agree on, and all the experts agree on, is you got to keep your feet dry. So for me, baby powder and powders, that kind of thing, did not work. They would just make more gooey mess in my feet. But by keep them dry, what that means is, to me, was changing your socks repeatedly, changing your shoes repeatedly. And especially if you're in a place like Europe where it's humid or it's wet, in the morning, you have all the dew in the grass. The nice thing we have here, especially with the XRedRocks, is it's incredibly dry. So in some ways, that was my downfall going into my first X Alps, and actually the second one too, is, what I'm going to talk about here in a little bit is the importance of simulating the racing that you're going to be doing, so you can see what happens with your feet well in advance, so you're not learning about it during the race. But if you're training where in the Rockies where I live, and it's really, really, really dry, and then you go to Europe and race in the Alps where it's really humid, really wet, you haven't really simulated what you're actually going to be going through. So for example, after the 2015 race, in 2017 onwards, I would always start my my big walking days by walking in the river first, getting my feet soaked, and then hitting the pavement. So you can do things like that to kind of simulate it, but in the end, it's just really important to do as much as you can in real life situations. If you blow it, what if you blow it? That means you've gotten the blister, you haven't dealt with the hot spot, for whatever reason, it's gone too far and you've gotten the blister. The pain of having the blister, I think, overrides the risk of infection, especially in a 3-day race like the XRedRocks. So I would, sterilize something, a lance, a pin, whatever, and pop it, and drain the fluid and try to keep it from getting infected, because otherwise it'll just blow up again. You'll get another blister. It's a very short-term salve, but otherwise the pain is pretty excruciating. So I would pop it as cleanly as you can, in a way that is, you're hopefully not going to get an infection, because those can be bad, and go on your way. What works, what doesn't? I've just mentioned a whole bunch of things, but again, it's very much dependent on who what you have for feet, how they're laid out, and what different things work for different people. So it's pretty hard to say this. I mean, the books that I've read on it, they all just say experiment, experiment, experiment. And that's pretty good advice. But what I can say is that other than the diet fix, which again, staying off inflammatory foods, which is basically carbs and sugar as much as possible, your biggest trick is just changing out your shoes. And these are not brand new shoes that you're using for the first time in the race. These are ones that you've broken in and used a lot, and you're really comfortable and really psyched to put on your feet, shoes that you love. And socks, you should have a lot of socks. Now, harder to do this in an XRedRocks type of event where you don't have a supporter. So, but carrying 2 or 3 extra pairs of toe socks that are really thin to begin with are, that's not a lot of additional weight for a lot less suffering. In 21, I for the first time, went with toe socks. This was a recommendation by Cody Matank, who said he'd never had any blisters, and that he did the 2019 race and the 21 race. And I went with the Injiji toe socks, really thin, and they're goofy as heck. They're weird to put on your feet, but those with an outer thin sock, and there's lots of good socks, Smart Wool on down, that was the ticket for me. I did not have any blisters in the 21 race, and you saw the pictures of my feet before then. So that worked really well for me. But again, you'd want to try that. what you want to be kind of proactive about is managing prone areas in advance. So for most people, that's your heels and that's your toes in certain areas. For me, it's actually around each toe. It's between each toe. They mine rub together because they kind of lay underneath one another. And so it's amazing. This 3M medical tape, you can see a picture of there. That first picture of my feet with all the tape wrapped around it, that looked terrible, but that's actually pretty preventative. And this kind of tape sticks on pretty well, but it doesn't create any friction. And that I found way better than first aid tape or athletic tape or duct tape. Duct tape's really not a good idea because your feet can't breathe. So this kind of tape, this 3M medical tape, allows your feet to breathe and it sticks on pretty well. You got to redo it 2 or 3 times a day, but if you do it basically every morning, I would wrap my feet with this kind of tape. And then as the race went on and my feet tend to get worse, then I'd have to wrap in new places. But especially on the heels, this stuff for me worked great. And I got this, I learned about this through Killian Tournay. And lance and drain, I talked about that already. So, if you do get a blister, my opinion is that you should lance it, or hit it with a safety pin, try to not get an infection, do it with something clean or hit it with some fire and then get rid of the fluid. Otherwise it'll just keep growing. Your skin will fall apart. You'll end up with a sore, but it's a manageable pain rather than the blister, which isn't very manageable pain. Talked about in GG toe socks already. Diet and blisters, I'm pretty convinced this does actually make a big difference. I radically changed my diet going into the 2017 race after suffering with so much inflammation after the first race. If you train kind of in a keto sense, with fat for fuel rather than fat and protein for fuel rather than carbs, your body won't tend to bonk. Your body runs on fat rather than glycogen, and you end up requiring way less calories and you just don't suffer inflammation. Again, if you train like crazy and you're going out for 24 hours, you can just live on Coca-Cola, which is what your body is screaming for. But if you live on Coca-Cola and carbs for 10 days, 12 days, or even 3 days for the XRedRocks, you could definitely suffer quite a bit and you don't feel very good and you end up getting a lot of GI issues. So I would recommend, but this isn't something you don't just go keto for the race. This is something you would train for. And it really worked for me. And, you also feel really good, but I'm not a nutritionist. I don't claim to be one. It's just something that really worked for me after we did a bunch of testing in 2015 and a bunch of home run testing. And I worked with a doctor who worked with a lot of Olympians down in Pocatello, and that was his recommendation. Because I was in the 2015 race, day 3 on, I was just living on Advil and sugar because that's what my body wanted and was telling me I needed. And the Advil was for the pain from the blisters, but also just my joints. And I never had any pain in the other 3 races because I think just because I ate a lot better. Managing the pain, what that means is basically if you do get the blisters, you'll find the mornings are pretty brutal. When you first get up, it's hard to put on your shoes. It's hard to get going. But in about 20, just bear it out. In about 25, 30 minutes, your feet will go numb and you can cruise and get right up to your normal speed. Every time you go flying, you have to go through this again, of course, when you get back to the ground. So it's better to just, of course, be preventative and not get the blisters in the first place. But if you do, know that you can manage it. You can deal. Some Advil or acetaminophen certainly helps, but you want to be reducing the inflammation. But there's side effects of course, hammering your liver with a ton of pain meds because your liver's already doing a lot of work. Here we go. So in summary, paths to success, reduce inflammatory foods, change up the shoes as much as possible, test them all well in advance, keep your feet dry. That's really important. This is success for me. I can't say it is for everybody, but thin toe socks plus a thin outer sock, that's kind of disrupts that friction between your feet and your shoe. Deal with hot spots right away and train as much as possible in real-time conditions. So do simulations. Those of you who are in the academy and working with Ben, or if you're just working with Ben, he'll have you be doing simulations. You've probably already done a couple, but they'll have you do simulations before the race. And those are really important. Gear. This is my X-Alps gear. This should be way too much. You don't need all this for the XRedRocks, but we'll just go through quickly through gear here. The mandatory gear is your wing, your harness, your reserve, your backpack, helmet, your inReach, iPhone, Vario, and walking light. So walking at night when it gets dark. And my kit with all that stuff was about 6.5 kgs in the last race. So that's pretty extreme. That's really good. If you can get down in the, the 7, 8 kg, you're loving it. Optional gear, hiking poles. Pretty much everybody uses the Black Diamond Z poles. I don't really consider these optional. Ben talked about that in his talk with training, that they've proven you're about 30% faster going uphill with poles. You're using your upper body. It's taking a lot of the load off your lower body, and they're just great to have. A Phoenix or similar kind of tracking watch that'll track your heart rate and your steps and all that kind of thing. That could be really valuable for training, and then also in the race, especially just monitoring your pulse, making sure you're not outside where you normally are for whatever reason. That can be a nice red flag. Backup battery, that's pretty much mandatory, really. A buff, sunblock, POV camera, food and water, sunglasses, water bottle, cash, a card. I always in the X-Alps, I always had at least 20 euros on me and a card and a credit card and that even for the XRedRocks, that can be pretty nice. You might find yourself in some little town and just be able to walk in and get a bite to eat or get something to drink. Nice to have. Music playlists, something to take your mind off the growing blister on your feet. Those kind of things are all optional, but nice to have. Now, packing and unpacking. I'm not going to get into details about how to pack your wing or how to unpack your wing. There's great videos on this that Kriegel's put out, and he's definitely the master. But what I would say is that you should come up with a system. And the system is not just your wing, it's everything that goes into and comes out of your bag. At the last XRedRocks that Aaron Duragati pretty handily won, I noticed when he would get to launch and when he would land that he would start counting. And he was counting the number of loose items that he knew went in his bag or came out of his bag. And he was counting in Italian, so it was kind of fun to hear him. But it's just, if you've got 8 things, you're counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, got my stuff. For me, I always just had everything laid out on my jacket. The first thing in top of my bag was my jacket. Boom, jacket comes out, and then everything comes out, goes onto the jacket. So you don't lose something in the grass or the ditch or whatever. You're often moving fast and you're distracted, tired, exhausted, whatever. And the worst thing to do is leave something important, some critical piece of your kit, your inReach or whatever it is. Everything you're carrying, we've got to assume is pretty important because we're carrying it. So just come up with a system that works and helps you remember what you've got. I just used the new Zip and Care bag when I was over for the Red Bull X-Alps last couple of weeks. And this is a concertina bag that zips up, and, it's 200 grams. It's basically nothing, that's an inReach basically, and phenomenal piece of kit, and it'd be even less if you took those handles off. You don't need the handles. So, if that helps you get organized and keep your stuff together, I've always just packed with just a strap, but it's harder to pack a wing in a nice, tidy little envelope with just a strap. So if I was doing the Red Bull X Alps again, or the XRedRocks or something, I would definitely use one of these. Keeps the sweat from getting your wing as well. It's way more protective. It's very incredibly light, and it makes packing really easy. So I would look into something like that. But whether you use that or a strap or nothing, you do want to come up with a method for folding your wing so your lines are really nice coming out and nice going in. And that's the key, is having them nice going in. So, I like to kind of rosette the wing, and as I'm coming into the wing, I'm looping my lines, and then I'm just loosely folding them into the wing, from the leading edge down to the tailing edge. So they're not tight and in a ball. And then I'm folding from the outside to the outside in, just really quick, boom, boom, boom. So it's not a proper concertina. You're not worried about that, but you're just, and then, because then the next time you take it out, you're getting in the harness, hucking the wing out, boom, you're in the air. You don't have to worry about your lines being messy or being tangled, but you have to practice this hundreds and hundreds of times to really get it right. You can see there 4 minutes or less, ideally. The reason I say that, it may not sound like it matters that much between 8 minutes and 4 minutes, but one of the many reasons Kriegel wins over and over and over and over again is what he says is he's constantly just getting a little bit of time on everybody. So he's got everything so much more dialed that every time he packs, every time he unpacks, at the end of the day, getting a little bit, getting a 1 or 2K more on glide, it all adds up. Those little things over the course of the race add up, they add up, they add up. We saw that with Aaron and Tanguy at the XRedRocks last year. They were insanely physically fit. So they were getting to launch, a few minutes before anybody else. They would get in the air faster than everybody else. They would then be able to extend their glide a little bit more than everybody else. And those little things add up. And so packing and unpacking is one of those little things that in a multi-day race really adds up. Yeah, you'll definitely lose stuff if you don't have a system, whether it's counting, whether it's putting on your jacket. If you just, at the end of the first day of the 2015 race, we had a really good flying day. We started in the Mozartplatz and up to the Geisberg, and then up to the Dockstein, and then down to turn point 3 in the Kimsey. And it was about 180K day in the air. And I landed, I was in 4th place. I was just ecstatic, over the moon, couldn't believe it. We'd flown a good portion of the course the first day. The flying was incredible. I was with Kriegel a bunch. I was leading at one point. It was amazing. And then I landed and just sprayed my gear all over the place. And, and I didn't check the map. I started running towards the next turn point and forgot that there was a river there, and had to backtrack and go to this bridge. But when I was backtracking, this woman was chasing me down, and she had my glove and my earpiece for my Bluetooth and something else. And she's like, geez, I got to slow down and have my stuff together here. I was just so excited. I forgot that, sometimes being fast is slow. In other words, sometimes being fast is moving slow and, making sure you got your stuff. And that's it for gear. So I'm going to stop the share here. Go back to you guys. Dan, Chris, you guys got any questions for me? You're both muted right now, but if you do, give me a shout.
No questions. Yeah, I lost power in the middle of that, so I have to go back and watch the recording. But yeah, I appreciate it.
No problem. Pleasure. How's the training going?
Good.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I took some time off after X Alps and then heading off to North Macedonia. So not hitting it super hard at the moment, but I'm psyched to get back into it after Macedonia.
Cool. Right on. Yeah, that you'll enjoy it over there. You'll get a lot of good hours in the sky.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Cool. Dan, you got any questions for me, bud? Oh, you don't have a microphone. Okay. Cool. Thanks for the chat. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. And have a wonderful evening. And we'll get this up online so people can watch it as soon as possible. But thanks, y'all. And next talk will be with Ben Abruzzo in about a week. He's going to be doing navigation and apps and all that kind of stuff. So that'll be really cool. But thanks, everybody. Talk soon.
Cool.
Cheers.
Thanks, Kevin. Bye.
Bye.